Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emma Crow. I'm a research scholar with the More Than Human Life, or MOTH program at NYU Law, where I've had the privilege, alongside César Rodríguez-Garavito, one of our panelists, and Jackie Gallant, MOTH Director of Programs, of co-authoring the framework we are launching today. That framework and its accompanying report are now available on the MOTH site for anyone who wishes to read and share them. Thank you all for joining us for listening to our animal kin, a conversation about one of the most fascinating and consequential frontiers in science and ethics today, technological advances that may allow us to decode and potentially communicate with non-human animals. These advances hold extraordinary promise for environmental protection, for science, for expanding our circle of moral consideration, but they also raise profound questions about autonomy, well-being, potential for exploitation, and power. That's why the MOTH program has developed a set of legal and ethical guardrails to guide what we are calling non-human animal communication technologies, or NACT. Today, we are presenting these principles developed through extensive consultation and hearing from three extraordinary panelists about what these guardrails may mean in practice. Before we begin, very quickly, a note on format. Following a brief presentation of the principles themselves, we'll have about 25 minutes of moderated conversation with our panelists, and then we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes of time at the end for your questions. So please feel free to submit questions throughout using the Q&A function. We are eager to hear from you. And now let me introduce our remarkable panelists. First, David Gruber is the founder and president of Project CETI, a nonprofit organization and interdisciplinary scientific and conservation initiative that's applying advanced machine learning and gentle robotics to translate the communication. He is a National Geographic explorer and distinguished professor of biology at City University of New York, Baruch College, and the CUNY Graduate Center. His research bridges multiple disciplines, and his inventions include technologies to perceive the underwater world from the perspective of marine animals. Next, Dr. Diana Reiss is a marine mammal scientist, cognitive psychologist, and a professor of psychology at Hunter College and the Graduate Center of CUNY. Her work centers on dolphin cognition and communication, conducted both in the field and with dolphins in human care. She previously directed dolphin research programs at Marine World Africa, USA, the New York Aquarium, and the National Aquarium, and helped to demonstrate mirror self-recognition in dolphins and elephants, while pioneering an underwater keyboard interface to study dolphin vocal learning. A co-founder and trustee of the Interspecies Internet, she collaborates across disciplines to advance interspecies communication and promote conservation, welfare, and empathy for other species. Last, but certainly not least, César Rodríguez-Garavito is an Earth rights scholar, field lawyer, and founding director of the More Than Human, or MOTH Life program at NYU Law. He is a professor of law and director of the Earth Rights Research and Action, or TERA Clinic at NYU, and his work has advanced new ideas and legal actions on issues such as climate justice, indigenous rights, and what he proposes to call more than human rights. His recent publications include More Than Human Rights, An Ecology of Law, Thought, and Narrative for Earthly Flourishing, and Climate Change on Trial, Mobilizing Human Rights Litigation to Accelerate Climate Action. Welcome to all three of you. We are psyched to have you here. And now, before we dive into our panel, I'm going to hand it right off to César to tell us about the PEPP framework.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, everyone, for being here with us today. It's a very special occasion for the MOTH program. We've been working on this report for 1.5 years now, with the help of many, many individuals who have given us their time, including peer reviewers, workshop participants in a workshop that we co-hosted with Project CETI, and Diana and other remarkable scientists and AI technologists and eco-philosophers attended. But we're ultimately, as MOTH, because this is an independently produced report, we are solely responsible for any shortcomings of this report. So you can blame Emma, Jackie, and myself for all of that. We started from the point of view of the possibilities. And in fact, we start the report by inviting the readers to imagine a future where humans could unlock and understand what non-human animals are saying. A world where we could translate how whales coordinate their complex social lives or comprehend the busy communication among elephants in the wild. Once the realm of science fiction, studies using non-human animal communication technologies, or NACTs, form a dynamic scientific field today, just like the application of artificial intelligence to translate human languages. Scientific collectives are deploying cutting-edge ideas and tools from biology, machine learning, linguistics, robotics, and other fields to record non-human animal communication, identifying hidden patterns within and uncover its fundamental elements. The positive potential of these technologies, as Emma said, is enormous. They could help generate curiosity and empathy with non-human animals. They could support legal actions for animal rights by providing evidence of non-human animals' health, preferences, suffering, and social lives. And we've written about this in a recent paper with Gasper Begus and David Gruber himself. Now, however, these technologies also pose serious threats to the well-being of non-humans and the nature of human relationships with the more than human world. This is why we at MOTH are launching this report, which focuses squarely on the risks associated with these technologies and how to address them. Past technologies offer cautionary tales. While cameras, drones, microphones, and hydrophones have been used to identify, understand, and protect non-human animals, they also have been used to track, exploit, harm, and experiment on them. Digital technologies and machine learning could exponentially increase the scale and speed of these harms. As these technologies attract more attention and funding, those risks may be compounded by pressures on actors in the field to accelerate data collection or monetize their findings. We start with the report identifying the risks. I don't have time to go into the risk. I want to get quickly to an overview of the principles that we're proposing, but I'll just kind of mention the 4 types of risks that we address in the report. First, physiological harms, potential for injury, death, and exploitation. Second, mental harms, distress, confusion, privacy violations stemming from the use, for example, of the playback of sounds to non-human animals. Third, relational harms, because of course, animals also have social lives, and those can be disrupted by this type of research. And finally, ecological harms. We take a broad view of impacts and we look at habitat damage, ecosystems-wide impacts. The main challenge that we faced in undertaking this research is the huge gap that's pretty obvious to everyone who's interested in developing any sort of guardrails on AI and similar technologies. This was not a simple exercise in what lawyers do all the time, which is reason by analogy. We could not just extrapolate or adapt an existing framework for the purposes of applying it to non-human animal communication studies. There are, of course, well-established animal research ethics protocols, some of which we use extensively, but they're not designed for this type of research. There are some proposals to regulate AI, but as we all know, government regulation and private regulation is scarce, and there is a fundamental regulatory gap, a vacuum that needs to be filled. So what we did at MOTH, based on our expertise in other fields, was to creatively patch together and develop a set of 12 principles that we hope will guide research and will be discussed, debated, iterated on by stakeholders of all kinds. This framework is geared mostly towards researchers, funders, engineers, data collectors, people who are actively engaging in these technologies. But it also is a proposal for the broader public because ultimately the fate of non-human animals is something that we should all be concerned with. Let me go through the basics of the framework now, and I'll end this intro by saying that this is a quickly evolving field. It's in its nascency, but it's already yielded very important scientific findings that I'm hoping that Diana and David will speak to, but it's in its early stages. So this proposal is necessarily provisional and will be iterating, publishing future versions of the report, and working with all kinds of stakeholders who are interested in conducting this type of research in an ethical and legal way. The report has, this is the cover of the report, which, as Emma said, is already live on MOTH's website. But the core of it is the PEPP framework. I will explain the acronym. That's the best that we could come up with, PEPP, but I hope that it's memorable. It's not exactly kind of sonorous, but I think that it does what it needs to do for now. And the key thing here is to understand that the framework is aimed to establish standards for legal and ethical conduct with respect to acts and provide guidance to shape decision-making. I already mentioned what this means. The only thing that I'll add at this point is that our starting point, and we make this very clear at the outset, is a moral and legal viewpoint that considers animals as subjects as opposed to objects. Subjects who are endowed with moral worth of themselves, with rights, including the right to the protection of their bodily and mental integrity, their autonomy, and their social lives. There's a whole section about values in the report. Then importantly, we made an explicit, a very intentional effort at offering a framework that could be tailored to fit the specificities of different scenarios. All kinds of animals are being studied with AI-assisted animal communication technologies, from whales to cetaceans. I have Diana here, so I have to always mention dolphins when I mention whales. But there's also studies on bees, on birds, and so on. So the hope is that the framework is broad enough to be adapted to specific circumstances and studies. Importantly, this framework is meant to apply to all stages of these studies. And this is where the only moment in my presentation where I have to give some more granular understanding of definitions, because we want to make sure that the scope of this report is well understood. And the first clarification is what we mean by NATs. So non-human animal communication technologies, as we understand them in this report, include any tool or system intended to assist in the translation of non-human animal communications or support bilateral species communications. This includes, but is not limited to, AI models, machine and deep learning algorithms, large language models, and biofeedback systems. This means that, and perhaps this is the way to helpfully kind of explain what's included and what's excluded, I'm going to make quick reference to what is not included. What is not included in this definition, because if we hadn't excluded important chunks of research, then the framework would not be helpful. We wanted to focus on the most consequential and potentially harmful, but also potentially beneficial technologies. The definition means that we are focusing on engagement with non-human animals. There are very interesting research happening, for example, on plant intelligence and communication. If we had our mycologist friends here who are very active and crucial contributors to the MOTH Collective, they'll be asking about fungi. So we're focusing only on non-human animals here. Then we're focusing on certain types of technologies. Technology is an overly broad term, so in the report we offer an hour view of technologies focusing on the type of techniques that I mentioned earlier. And finally, we're focusing, as the acronym suggests, on communication. Communication may consist in humans listening to non-human animal vocalizations, and in some cases potentially translating them into human languages, or in bilateral exchanges between human and non-human animals. So listening, just listening without trying to communicate without playing back does count as a case study, as a case in which these technologies are directly relevant and these protocols are helpful. This is why we chose to use the title of listening to our animal kin for the report. What is excluded from this definition are well-established forms of bioacoustics research that consist of passive acoustic monitoring, which yield data that is not intended for use in communication through the technologies that the framework focuses on. I'm happy to answer any questions about the definitions, but in the interest of time, I want to move to simply putting on the table the principles that we unpack in the report. Unfortunately, I won't be able to go into any detail, but the report is now live and will be here for Q&A, so happy to go into details. As I said, it's a total of 12 principles organized under 4 pillars. This is the PEPP acronym. So the first pillar is called prepare. As the name suggests, it's everything that we propose that stakeholders in the use of this technology should use before undertaking this type of research. Then the second pillar is engage. I won't go into details because I'll read the principles. The third one is prevent. And finally, we have protect. So quickly, under prepare, we have 2 principles. The first 2 principles out of the 12. The first one has to do with research design. Operational plans and protocols for NACs should adhere to scientifically rigorous and protective research standards, including the well-known 3 Rs of animal research, meaning replacement, reduction, and refinement. Second principle, governing protocols. Prior to the design, construction, and deployment of NACs, there should be transparent and robust ethics and data governance protocols in place. This will be routine in university contexts that have animal ethics boards. The reality is that this type of research is not being conducted only in university settings, but in different types of settings. So what we're proposing here, we say this very explicitly in the report, is for all actors in the NAC space to converge on the high road, to choose among the protocols available, because oftentimes, these interdisciplinary scientific collectives bring together scientists from across the world, from across the disciplines. So the proposal here is that the most protective protocol that applies to any of those individuals or collectives in their jurisdictions be adopted as the one that the collective follows. The EU regulations, for instance, are notoriously more protective than other regulations, and we comment on that in the report. Okay, moving on to pillar 2, NAC actors should engage. What does that mean? It means under principle 3 that diverse and meaningful stakeholders should be engaged. And by NAC actors pursuing diverse and meaningful stakeholder engagement, we mean, for example, engaging the local communities that have been in conversation and relationship with non-human animals for the longest time. This includes indigenous peoples, but not only indigenous people, local communities that may be harmed as well, or may derive benefit from the deployment of these technologies as animals are understood better. Principle 4 is about recognition. NAC actors should recognize the contributions of non-human subjects to their research findings. So just to be provocative for now and leave it in the air, because there is a whole section about that in the report, we propose, for instance, that the contributions of the non-human subjects, the dolphins, the whales, the birds, and so on, to the research findings be acknowledged at the very least in a footnote somewhere in the studies, but ideally through financial contributions to their well-being. Sometimes the animals under research are used to develop protocols or products that end up being profitable, and those animals do not see the benefits of that research in terms of the protection of their ecosystems and their lives. Finally, transparency. This one is pretty transparent. So NACT actors should operate with proactive transparency in their activities and in the reporting of impacts. Again, to some of you who are not necessarily insiders to this world, this may seem pretty standard. This is standard definitely in the type of research that I'm most familiar with, which is social science research, but also in our extensive consultations, interviews, and peer review processes with animal research ethicists. They insisted in transparency for a good reason. Moving on to the last bit, Pillar 3 is about preventing. And this is crucial, and this is one where environmental law, which we have considerable expertise in, comes in handy. Burden of justification. NACT actors carry the burden of justifying any risk of harm to humans and non-humans. If they are going to cause risk and potentially harm, then the need for the potentially harmful activity should be justified. Relatedly, Principle 7 is about risk analysis and mitigation. NACT actors should implement processes to identify, analyze, and mitigate all possible direct and indirect risks raised by the use of NACTs over the course of their life cycles, from design to implementation to deployment of these technologies. And very importantly, this is perhaps the most, if not one of the most, if not the most important principle in environmental law, which is the precautionary principle. NACTs should be conceived, designed, assembled, and used in a manner consistent with the principle of precaution. This means that whenever there's scientific uncertainty of the potential of causing harms, then scientific collectives and stakeholders engaged in this type of research should abstain or look for alternative measures or approaches according to the 3R principle. Finally, I'll end with protect. Principle 9 is all about autonomy. This is where the consideration of animals as subjects as opposed to objects comes through most clearly. NACTs should respect the autonomy of non-human animals who should be understood as subjects rather than objects. So we're squarely asserting and justifying in the report the autonomy of non-human animals, which is a term that is usually used only for human beings. Importantly, there will be, as in any legal framework, especially one that deals with a complex issue and an emergent issue like this one, there will be conflicts. And sometimes readers or critics of this type of framework in any given regulatory field reasonably raise the objection that there will be conflicts of rights and conflicts of interest. The principle of the aim to advance science, for instance, may clash with the well-being of non-human animals. We're very comfortable with clashes of rights. This is what regulators, policymakers, ethicists, lawyers deal with all the time. So there's no one single principle or interest that is absolutely priority relative to everything else. But we're offering as guidance for those situations of potential clashes, this principle, which is the best interest of the animal. NACTs should be conceived, designed, assembled, and used in a manner consistent with the best interests of the non-human animal standard. So when in doubt, we invite NACT actors to prioritize the best interests of the non-human animal, because this is a highly asymmetric power relationship. These are the vulnerable parties in a relationship where human beings, not only currently, but historically, have had the upper hand and have caused harm that needs to be redressed or at least mitigated currently. Finally, moving on to the last two principles, this is all about implementation. NACD actors should comply with all existing law and act with continuous diligence, accountability, and urgency to implement these framework principles. There are many regulatory frameworks that are perfect on paper, but end up not making a difference in practice because implementation falters and because both the regulators and those who are being regulated commit to those principles or those frameworks in theory, but do not put in place any implementation mechanism. So we're proposing a set of implementation procedures that will hopefully help NACD actors follow these principles in practice. And finally, remediation. Since it is impossible to avoid all kinds of, it is impossible to avoid completely risks and harms. We have as a final principle remediation. NACD actors should urgently and thoroughly remediate any harms resulting from the construction or use of NACDs. I'll stop there. I know that this is a lot. This is why it took us 1.5 years to develop these protocols. But we wanted to hopefully be of help by going into the details, getting granular, but at the same time leaving the protocol at an intermediate level of abstraction so that that protocol could be adapted to specific circumstances. And as I said, and this is what I would like to say in closing, be improved on, iterated over the months and years as these technologies continue to be improved and deployed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cesar, for really capturing the spirit and direction of the principles. Now, in the interests of time, we're going to get right to our panelists, starting with a few questions about how the principles that Cesar just described connect to and respond to real-world research. So, David, my first question is for you. You have been working at the cutting edge of whale communication technology. Now that you've heard the proposed PEPP framework, I'm wondering, can you talk about a moment in your research, perhaps a specific situation with SETI or elsewhere, where you've faced one of the dilemmas or risks that these guardrails are designed to address?
Yeah, well, thank you, Emma and Cesar and Jackie, and for spending 1.5 years to dive into this work and for convening the field and Diana together to do this. So first, just a huge gratitude for getting into this and for being the first to actually put these guide rails in place, which are incredibly important. What's interesting, I think, from my point and coming from the animal perspective, being a marine biologist for several decades, and Diana, we've always put the animal first, and we're doing this for the best interest of the animal. But we're seeing, though, as this field is burgeoning and expanding, we're getting just tremendous amount of requests to use the SETI data and to make it available to do different things. But it got us concerned of, are all groups interested in putting the animal in the center here and kind of seeing this as a way to bring us closer to whales and understand them more. So it really just raised the concern of before, deeply sharing all this information that we're collecting, just to make sure that we're asking that question, we're doing it responsibly. And we want to be able to share. But we just really wanted to make sure that we didn't have to backtrack and apologize later, which I think is very important to kind of be a step ahead of this.
Thank you so much, David. Now, to Diana, you have spent decades pioneering interactive communication systems with dolphins, including your groundbreaking underwater keyboard work. As you read the proposed guardrails, what resonated with you in terms of lessons learned from your hands-on experience over the years?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I thank everybody for joining us today. And particularly, I just want to thank Cesar and David for running the workshop, that they did a year ago, bringing a number of us together to enter into this discussion. And I'm really excited about continuing this discussion further. It really gave us such an important jumpstart on this. And I'm saying very much what David said, but I'll say a few other things as well. Most of our colleagues that we've been working with in the field, and I just want to backtrack for a moment and say I'm wearing two hats today. I'm here as a marine mammal as a marine mammal scientist, but I'm also, as they mentioned, with Interspecies Internet. My collaborators, I'm a founding a trustee and founder of the Interspecies Internet, along with Peter Gabriel, Neil Gershenfeld, and Vint Cerf. And we all share the importance of developing these guardrails and ethics. And we've been talking to our large community of scientists. David's included in this and has been helping us along the way in thinking about and developing these ethics. So this has been a huge jump ahead for all of us. And again, we are deeply appreciative of that. In terms of my own research, it's interesting when we talk about the way we perceive the non-humans that we're working with. Many of us have worked with developing two-way communication systems. My colleagues like Irene Pepperberg's work with Alex, the African gray parrot, and some of the other parrots she's working with. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, who's worked with technologies way before we even had the acronym for it, NACT, with lexicograms. Penny Patterson, others working in the field of communication have had these studies where we've provided these codes and we've considered these animals really collaborators. It's interesting. We may not write them, but I know in my first slide, I always say, here's a bottlenose dolphin, my research collaborator, because often many of us get our ideas and our inspiration and drive from working with these amazing animals with the dream to do the basic research we think is so important to show their capabilities when we've been having so much trouble decoding, which we really have up until recently. And we've offered them codes so they can work with us and help us along understanding who they are and their cognitive capabilities. And I think we now have learned that many species using these artificial codes are capable of what we would call referential or symbolic communication. Now, that doesn't mean that they're doing it in their own natural systems, but it gives us insights into their possible capabilities. So when we think about moving forward with these other new forms of translation, I think that we do still need to keep in mind these animals are truly going to be collaborators with us. We can't do it without them. I think, César, you said it very well when you talked about it. How do we acknowledge them in our behavior along the process? And I think that's what we're concerned about. I think we'll probably have time to talk about this later, but hopefully. But I think when we think about it, when I envisioned the keyboard, it was always with the idea of giving them choice and control. And I see that reflected in what the document that you've put forth is, watching these animals, listening to them, being sensitive to what they're doing in response to these technologies that we're using. If we're monitoring them, what is our presence doing in terms of their behavior? Being sensitive, knowing when to back off. And that really, I'm going to bring this back, and I'll keep this short. But there's the myth that so many of us know about King Solomon's ring. King Solomon had this magic ring that allowed him to communicate with other animals, and part of that that was reinterpreted by Conrad Lorenz in his book King Solomon's Ring was maybe it wasn't a magic ring, maybe it was the power of observation and listening that allowed us to communicate. And I think we're taking that another step. It's going to be our power to listen and observe and know when we need to back off, when it's okay to be working with them. So I sort of want to just put that out there because I think that's one of our challenges. And I think the more we are respectful and really good observers and listening, it's really going to help us guide us on on these principles and how we're moving forward. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this dialogue. Okay, I'll stop there, not to take too much time.
Thank you so much, Diana, and to both of you as well, from at least us at MOTH. Thank you not only for your participation and all of your feedback throughout this process, but for really the example that you said as scientists and innovators. As a non-scientist, I think it's so heartening to see how you both have led in your work with empathy and proactive care and curiosity, rather than any other motivation. So now I'm going to turn a little bit to dig into the impacts. Cesar, this question is for you. You have worked on groundbreaking legal frameworks for human rights and more than human rights in many jurisdictions globally. These guardrails are designed as voluntary principles for now, but you have worked on transforming soft norms into hard law before. What does the pathway look for this document to become binding, whether national, regional, international? What needs to happen politically and legally for that?
Thanks, Emma. This is actually a well-established path towards regulation. Since it's become very difficult, for example, in international law to come to an agreement on virtually any subject matter, regulators and lawyers and scientists and citizens from around the world have tried different options. And one option has been to start with voluntary principles that get the endorsement, that are endorsed, they get the support of a critical mass of key actors in any given space. I have experience in an antecedent effort, and an effort that is an antecedent to this one, in this field of business and human rights, which led to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. It all started with a voluntary framework that was adopted by the UN eventually, which gave it kind of a certain authoritative force, but it was still voluntary. So all the implementation was left for later. And the way that these initially voluntary frameworks work is that once they are adopted by a critical mass of actors in the relevant field. So this is why I mentioned that these protocols are meant for scientists, funders, engineers, data collectors, anyone who uses or deploys or designs these types of technologies to study animal communication. If, as we hope, a number of other collectives, the Interspecies Internet, CETI, many others that have participated at different points in discussions about ethics and regulation, if they, as we hope, see value in this approach, that they will come on board and that they will commit publicly to endorsing and deploying these protocols. And that this will be seen as a signal of good intention, and also that will be made kind of woven into the incentives that scientists and others have in pursuing this type of studies. The aspiration here is that instead of a competition, a race to the bottom, there will be a race to the top, because inevitably there's competition in any field, and we want to raise the floor. And we want to offer a high road approach and have different collectives commit publicly to following these principles. Again, not because these are definitive, not because these are perfect, but because we firmly believe, after engaging with many experts in different parts of the world and having been in different efforts of this kind in the past, that after that moment of endorsement by a critical mass, that this approach and this framework may become mainstream in the field, or at least an approach that is used extensively and that can serve as a point of convergence for stakeholders in this field. Just to be more practical about the next step, and I'll leave that to the end, because we do have a proposal for what should happen next for that movement from soft law or voluntary and non-binding law to binding protocols and binding principles that will guide research going forward.
Thank you so much, Cesar. I want to return briefly to the kinds of harmful impacts that these guardrails are designed to prevent or address. So, Diana, I'm going to come back to you briefly. Drawing both on your research experience, but also your work with interspecies internet, what concerns you most about how these technologies could evolve or be misused? What safeguards do you think are essential? And do you think that these guardrails respond to those risks?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. It's critical. So I just want to mention that from the interspecies internet point of view, we conducted a workshop at the Santa Fe Institute about over a year ago. It's about a year and a half ago. We're planning to do another one this coming April, May again, and we focused a lot on ethics. Because again, this was about decoding. How do we proceed to decode? And this, very much the same things we're talking about now. And we had a deep concern as a community. These were scientists working in the field with various species. It was the SFI community that deals with complexity. And we were talking about as we're using these technologies now, what are the guardrails? So again, we were discussing all these. Some of the things you've already heard mentioned when César was talking is how this information can be used. If we are successful at decoding and start understanding the signals of these animals, there are all these benefits where you could imagine being able to predict health of a population, or if they're communicating about dangers, if they're communicating about lack of food sources. I mean, we can use our imagination to see how we could help them, even using these signals back to them to warn them of dangers would be remarkable, being able to predict health. But again, if we move into the dark side, as both David and César have mentioned, they can also be used for poaching, for using those animal signals to attract those animals. To some extent, people use these signals already without decoding. They listen to animal signals, they can emulate them and attract them. So we're well aware of these possible dangers. Other dangers get into things like disrupting their social behavior, obstructing where they are, where they're foraging. I'll give you a specific example. Many years ago, my colleagues and I published a paper showing that the use of drones, these aerial drones, when we were using them in Belize, did not disrupt dolphins. We were flying them at a high enough height, but at that very same height, they were really very disruptive to manatees. Manatees were much more sensitive. So that informs us that you don't want to use those kind of technologies, at least at those heights or at those angles. It's critical for us to be sensitive about how the technologies we use may disrupt mental, social, ecological aspects of those animals. We don't want to do that. And again, we want to be good stewards for these populations or these groups of animals. And it really is going to be constantly being aware of how it can be disruptive. So as we're trying to hone the best technologies for helping us decipher, translate, we also want to be equally active at making sure we're not disrupting their lives. And again, it comes with respect.
Thank you so much for beautifully illuminating how these technologies can really act as either a shield or as a sword, but then also demonstrating how with some of these non-invasive or less invasive research methods, the impacts really need to be assessed, not only in terms of the specific non-human animal research subject, but really on an ecosystem-wide and holistic basis. That's fantastic. In the interests of time, we're going to move on to our last questions. David, this one's for you. These guardrails are meant to guide projects in the non-human animal communication technology field, of which CETI is a part. What do you hope other scientists and technologists will do with these principles? What themes or risks do you think actors in your space need to be attending to at this moment in time?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Emma. I think the key thing here is to just the precautionary principle is so important as you bring up. And one thing to note is that, we already have the power now with technology to really terribly impact, all the marine mammals and fish, and to extract, incredible amounts. So this is like another level. And can this technology actually bring it closer? Can it be used to actually protect them? Is really the big question that why when forming Project SETI 5 years ago, was really at the forefront and still is. And thinking about some of the risks, there's a couple key things, and I also wanted to just acknowledge two people that aren't here today. Roger Payne, who is my friend and mentor, who discovered that whales sing in 1970 and really played a big role in catalyzing the Save the Whale movement, really came from one finding that whales sing. And that led to just monumental positive impacts for whales and dolphins. And the other was a friend and colleague, Karen Backer, who is actually just holding her book here, who passed away untimely 2 years ago, and wrote this book, The Sounds of Life, how digital technology is bringing us closer to the worlds of plants and animals. And then it followed that up and posthumously with Gaia's Web, and really kind of painting two possibilities here. Where one possibility where this technology is used in a very connective way that plots out a way which we want to coexist with the more than human life around us, and another one where it is used manipulatively. But to give specific ideas, I think it's important to really listen before jumping in and starting to interact. And I think you bring up these playback studies, which are in the past, playback studies have been used for over 100 years, whereas you play back sounds to animals and to try to reinforce whether that animal recognizes it as their name. So they've been used in many positive things. But there's also been, in Katie Payne, who worked on whales and then also extended her work into elephants, told a story of playing back sounds of a deceased elephant to a group of elephants, and it just caused a complete amount of emotional distress to the elephants upon hearing of a beloved family member and hearing the voice. So even just our typical recording abilities and playing back the wrong sounds could cause, distress. And I think now there's, as we go back into the ocean now with all these digital generative AI, do we want to just jump in with a speaker and just start playing things? And sometimes this has already been done now, and they've got negative responses from the whales. So I just wanted to really be cautious of making sure we understand before we interact, and especially with really captive animals like birds that are in a cage and you could record them and play back. So really wanted to think about how the animals are being centered in this work. And coming from this as a marine biologist and ecologist, like we're so used to that, but now suddenly these worlds are coming together. Where even on the SETI team, we've got roboticists and AI specialists. So as all these new people enter this arena, and we're welcoming them, but we want to make sure that everyone's intentions are right, and this really sets the field off on a positive note. So I think being representing SETI and Diana representing the Interspecies Internet, we're really two of the major groups that are thinking about this now and setting the field. So really hopeful that we set this out into the right positive way, so we could lead into the more positive versions that Karen has suggested in Gaia's Web.
Thank you so much, David. I think that's actually the perfect end to our panelist portion. We are very rapidly running out of time. So quickly, before we hand it off to Q&A, I'm curious to hear first from César, and then David and Diana, please chime in as well. What is next for these guardrails?
What is next from the point of view of MOTH? MOTH has kind of the advantage here, although initially it was a disadvantage to be an outsider because we had to learn so much about this complicated field. But we caught up somewhere in the process with the science and the ethics and deployed expertise that we had in other fields. But the advantage is that, of course, we're not embedded in any scientific collective that is at the cutting edge of this science. We haven't been at this for the longest time, like Interspecies Internet has, or CETI has done more recently. So we wanted to offer an outsider's perspective that could hopefully provide some guidance to insiders in this field. And in that spirit, the next step is to engage more fully with the whole range of actors in the NACS field. This is now open to everyone to engage with, to discuss, hopefully to endorse. And because, again, we know how past efforts of this sort have succeeded, the next step will be to produce a shorter distillation, a shorter version of the protocols, and invite other collectives to co-author an individual scientist to co-author a perspectives article in a scientific journal, where we would acknowledge the co-authorship of the other willing actors, and also of any of the peer reviewers or any of the interviewees that we engage with during the research process. Of course, the list of people who have contributed to this is too long for us to give explicitly in the report. Also, we did not want to attribute any of the views to any of them, but of course, key people in the MOTH collective, and I see that we have a couple of them in the room here, including our colleague Ashley Nemeth, who co-authored the opportunities, kind of the bright side of the research paper, and our colleague David Abram, who was also part of the workshop that we co-hosted with CETI. So next step is we produce a shorter version, we open it up for endorsement, and soon, because one thing that the MOTH collective does, in the MOTH program here in NYU does, we move forward. In the face of uncertainty, we use the precautionary principle ourselves, but we also are not paralyzed by it because we see urgency in this regulatory space. And hopefully there will be a critical mass of NACT actors behind this framework. And again, if you're interested in endorsing and engaging with this framework, please do reach out. Our colleagues here will drop the link to our website, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Cesar. Diana and David, anything to add quickly before Q&A?
I'll do this really quickly. So we're really excited that an X Prize has been developed now, and they contacted us at Interspecies Internet. So we are partnering with the X Prize along with Santa Fe Institute, who are also partners, for decoding. And I won't say too much about this, but this is a prize in development now. And I'll just read a really quick quote from X Prize and how this has already influenced having some guardrails. This is from it's a quote from Kevin Marriott, who's the X Prize senior technical lead. Okay. And he said, X Prize will rigorously adhere to the legal and ethical standards of the MOTH PEPP framework in designing the X Prize interspecies communications competition, and in supporting teams as they develop non-human animal communication technologies. We are deeply grateful to the Interspecies Internet and MOTH, the MOTH program at NYU Law for their vital support and guidance in shaping this prize. So already, I think this framework has had a huge impact. And again, all of our organizations are really trying to work together now to do the right thing and have wonderful discoveries in the end to help animals.
Thank you for that, Diana. It's wonderful to hear, and I think it also is highly demonstrative of how quickly this field is moving, and also how wonderful it is to see so many disparate collectives come together and help guide the responsible development of these technologies at this very nascent, opportune moment. So with that, I think we've got 6 minutes remaining for Q&A, so hopefully we can get to 1 or 2. I will ask our panelists to please keep your responses brief. And I think we are hearing a lot of questions about consent. So my question for the 3 of you is, at a high level, how does this framework address the issue of non-human animal consent?
David, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think in one sense it doesn't address it directly about getting consent, but we would actually be able to need to translate to be able to get that consent. So prior to be able to get official unequivocal consent, there is the idea of how do we work in the most gentle, minimally invasive or passive ways possible. And that's something that we really put at the heart of our work is designing the most gentle ways of doing the work. So even down to the suction cups, they're inspired by suckerfish. We would have an idea that there absolutely can't be a drop of blood drawn through any of the research, so that's already off limits. We'd already had a very extensive in-water protocol. So most of our work is actually done passively, just with microphones. But if there ever was a need, and this is before this NAC protocols were enacted, we had a kind of rigorous way of how you would actually be able to get into the water and work with the whales, and no one's actually even passed that yet among the CETI organizations. So yeah, we're excited now to think about how we can actually get consent. And so it's a really wonderful question.
Yeah, that is the type of question that we're very interested in. It came up repeatedly in the consultations and in the feedback that we got in our own questions going into the research. Promising to keep this to 1 minute, I'll show, because I didn't get to the structure of each principle, just an invitation for you all to go into the details of the report, but there's one principle. It's not like there's a principle for everything, but there is a principle that speaks more directly to this issue of consent, which is the autonomy principle. So I'm going to show 2 slides quickly just to point in the direction of the relevant section in the report. You may remember, or very likely you won't remember, what Principle 9 says, autonomy. And then under each principle, we unpack each principle into operative elements, and then we give examples. So I'll just read this. So this is the principle of non-human animal autonomy aspires to ensuring voluntary participation. This is aspirational for now, but there are circumstances where the desire not to engage with research is clear. So this is not impossible in some circumstances. And second, as David already said, the guidance here is the aspiration to minimize burdens on autonomy, for example, through gentle technology that minimizes interference with animal lives. And then I'll give an example and end here. A pod of orcas has consistently expressed disinterest in the tentative outreach of a group of researchers hoping to communicate with the pod using a NAT. Recognizing that the orcas desire to be left alone, the researchers cease attempts to engage them. I'll stop there in the interest of time.
All right, I think we can move on to one other question before we end. Cesar, this question will probably be for you. And the question is, why were plants and fungi excluded from this framework?
Yes, this is the problem of engaging with scientists across the board, because actually MOTH first started with engagement with mycologists, our dear friends, Marilyn Sheldrake and Juliana Furci and Toby Kears. And every time they see my background here, which is all plants, they say, where's the soil? And then the animal people say, I don't see any animal in the background. So we are taking very seriously the possibility of developing guardrails and engaging in conversations on plant intelligence. We've been, even in some of the scientific meetings that we've been invited to, we've listened to fantastic scientists who are working on plant communication. And of course, the pioneering work of Monica Gagliano 15 years ago, when she came up with studies that were peer-reviewed and were heavily criticized by people who are now fully active in the plant intelligence research. And we know, if you read Zoe Schlanger's great book on the light eaters, that there's a whole field. So this is again, moving from science fiction to science. And we are definitely planning on seeing how we can deploy, redeploy, adapt what we've learned in the field of NACs for non-human animals in the study of other kingdoms of life.
Thank you, Cesar. We are coming to the end of the hour. Thank you so much to David, Diana, and Cesar for this rich and thought-provoking conversation. And thank you to everyone on the Zoom for joining us. As Cesar mentioned earlier, the framework that we've discussed today is just the beginning. It is designed as a living document that will evolve as the science advances and as we learn from practitioners, key stakeholders like Diana and David, and of course from non-human animals themselves. So as the process continues, we do invite your feedback and your engagement. As a reminder, you can find the full text of the PEPP framework and its accompanying report on the MOTH program website. And thank you again. Have a great day to everyone.
Thank you.